Hey, this is Tony here, and today I'm going to show you some processing steps for IC5146 or the Cocoon Nebula using Siril and Photoshop. And so with no further ado, let's get started. And so I've got my Siril opened, and I've already got the image file opened. This image file has already been aligned and stacked using Siril. And the view that you're seeing right now is in a linear view. And I'm going to go ahead and click down here and select auto stretch. And you can see here's the image unprocessed. What the auto stretch do is it doesn't change the image file. It's simply just a way of looking at the file so you can see a few more details as you process the image. The first thing that we want to do in the workflow is maybe crop the image a little bit. You can see right up here at the top, there's a star here that has a halo kind of feeding into the image. So maybe for aesthetic purposes, we want to do a slight image crop. So I'm going to hold down the left mouse button and I'm going to drag this rectangle and I'm going to right click and then click on crop down here and go ahead and crop the image. So there's the first step. The next thing I want to do is what's called plate solving. This really, at a high level, tells Siril that the object that we're looking at and kind of some of the capture parameters for capturing this image. Coincidentally, this image was 5-minute subs, and there's about 35 5-minute subs. So not a huge amount of capture time, but probably enough just to give a reasonable end result. The first thing then, after the crop, is let's go ahead and do a plate solve. So we go to Tools, Astrometry, and then Image Plate Solver. And we basically type in the number of the image, which, as I said at the beginning, is IC5146, the Cocoon Nebula. Click on Find. And then you notice from the image data that's been collected, it shows the focal length of the telescope that I used and the size of the pixels in the camera that I used to capture the image. So we'll go ahead and click on OK, and the plate solve will take just a few seconds, and you see it's already completed. So we've now fed that data into Siril, basically. What you'll also see on this image file is on the left-hand side, the background is fairly dark, but on the right-hand side, it's almost like a grayish background. So we have somewhat of a gradient in the image. It may be due to my neighbors having their lights on, or maybe some natural illumination in the sky. We want to try and reduce that background gradient. If we go up to scripts and then go down to Python scripts and processing, we're going to select this script here called AutoBGE. Click on that, run the script, and it just takes a few moments after I click on process here to process that background. And you'll notice that as Siril does this, these little squares appear in the background, and that's just Siril and the script doing its magic to try and reduce the background gradient. And then once that's completed, in a few seconds, and you see here processing is complete. Let's minimize this dialog. And you can see here that the background is a little more uniform across the image. The next thing we want to do is what's called color calibration. This is really a way of matching the object to, let's call it its natural colors as it might appear to the human eye if we were actually there looking at the object. So we go to image processing and color calibration, and we're going to select spectrophotometric color calibration. And you see here in this dialog, it's already populated the sensor that I used in my camera, which is a Sony sensor. And I also selected earlier on the filter that comes with that camera. It happens to have a UV infrared filter already installed on the camera. So then I'm going to go ahead and click OK. And then what it's doing now is it's doing a color calibration against the database of that image And you can see the colors have subtly changed. So let's go ahead and close this dialog. What I like to do as well is I like to do what's called a green noise reduction. So in image processing, there's an item here called remove green noise. And if I click on apply, there's a very subtle change in the color. Some people don't do this, but I'm just go ahead and just show you what can be achieved in Siril. So we've done basically a crop, a plate solve, background removal or a gradient removal, excuse me, color calibration, and then the green noise. So now let's dig in and do a bit more processing. I'm going to use my mouse wheel and wheel up on the mouse wheel. And you can see that zooms in a little bit. We're going to now go ahead and try and sharpen these stars up and some of the nebula elements here. And there's a script in Siril that I've downloaded. So scripts, Python scripts, and it's processing, and it's called Cosmic Clarity Sharpen. I'm going to click on that, run the script, and then I'm going to select here both objects in the sharpening mode. And I'm going to leave everything else just at default, and then I'm going to click on apply. And when I do that, it does take maybe a minute for the sharpening to take place on both the stars and the nebula area. And you can see that there's a status here running on the right-hand side in Siril. Now, my computer has a pretty powerful GPU or graphics processing unit. So the sharpening progress in using Cosmic Clarity can move along in a fairly rapid clip. If you don't have such a graphics processing unit, it may take quite a bit longer for this process to complete. Maybe as long as 4 or 5 minutes to do that. But you can see it as it's showing here. Mine is taking just a few minutes, or about a minute or so, for it to complete. So we're going to let it run here. While it's still doing that, you notice that I did choose the default settings in Cosmic Clarity. You can, if you want to, you can go ahead and increase the sharpening amount before you start this process. But again, I've just left all mine at the default settings. And this script that's running is basically within Siril. If you want to install this script, you would go to Scripts at the top and click on an item called Get Scripts. And you'll see this Cosmic Clarity Sharpening will be listed in the scripts, and you just go ahead and install it. So I didn't include that step in this particular video. And so now as the process is going along here, and now it says ready. So the process has completed. Let's minimize this dialog here. Now let's do a before and after view. So up here is the before view. You see the stars a little bit softer, as is the nebula area. And then let's just do a redo. And it's definitely done some sharpening of the nebula area and of the stars. You'll also notice here that there is some noise illustrated by this graininess effect. I'm going to go ahead and try and reduce some of that noise. So up in scripts, Python scripts, and processing, there's another script you can download. And this one's called GraXpert. There are other tools you can use instead of this, but I'm just going to select this one just to show you in this particular video. And once GraXpert launches, I'm going to click here and select denoising. And then I'm going to click on apply. Now, GraXpert AI also makes use of my GPU to do the processing. And you can see here, look, on the right-hand side, the processing is moving along. It's about 1% per second. But again, it's moving along in a fairly rapid clip compared with if you didn't have such a powerful GPU in your computer. So that's just something just to bear in mind. And then you'll notice here, just out of interest with GraXpert, there's a model here. So this is the AI model version. And so what GraXpert does is it takes information from many, many hundreds or thousands of known images, and that's how it does its calculation of reducing the noise. It sort of goes, okay, at a high level, I think you're looking at the Cocoon Nebula, based on my model and information I've got, then the noise then the nebula should kind of look like this. So it's not by any means, just to be clear, none of these tools are introducing elements into the image, just to be clear. They're simply optimizing the image. So it's not like it's doing things like, oh, there's a star missing, I'm going to go ahead and add a star. That wouldn't really make sense to do that. It's sort of one of those borderline cases where, is the image still your image? So just to be clear, GraXpert AI is not adding things to your image. So it just looks like it's completed, and I'll go ahead and minimize, and you see, yeah, the noise has definitely been reduced quite a bit. Now, the next thing we want to do is first of all, I'm going to use my mouse wheel. I'm going to zoom out a little bit, and then I'm going to go into another tool that's been introduced in Siril. So scripts, Python scripts, and then I'm going to click down here, and there's a series of scripts under the VeraLux banner, and this one is called the hypermetric stretch. I'm going to run that script. And what the hypermetric stretch is doing is it's kind of selectively optimizing the contrast in the image. And the first thing I do is it has a sensor profile here. And if I click on it, my sensor is actually listed. So my camera sensor is listed. I'm going to click on that to select that. And it kind of helps with the process. If your camera sensor is not listed, you can just use the recommended default value. The other thing I'm going to do here is there's a target BG setting here. On an earlier image processing, maybe yesterday or the day before, I may have reset this. So let's click on default and just set all these back to default. And the first thing I want to do is click on live preview. So this is nice capability in this tool. And you can see in the live preview, well, the nebula is kind of showing, but it's not super clear. So the first thing we want to do is, based on these settings here, are all left at default, I'm going to click on this auto calc log D, and basically it will kind of optimize the image processing based on what these settings are. So let's click on that. And you see when I do that, after it's analyzed the image, certainly the nebulas come out a bit clearer. Again, I'm going to leave these defaults as is and then click on process. And it just takes a few seconds to process the image and then write it to Siril. And so we now go ahead and close this tool. And you can see now the images really start to appear nicely. The next thing that I'm going to do is what's called a curves transformation. And I'll explain what that is in a few moments. So we go to image processing, stretches, and then curves transformation. You see on this curve here, so this bottom left here area of the curve, it kind of represents the dark area of the image. And I'm going to click on my left mouse button, and I'm going to drag this a bit to the right, just to the start of the curve. And when I do that, you notice that the image has been darkened. In particular, areas of the sky, probably where there is no nebula, more accurately represent the darkness of the sky. And that's literally what I've done on this curve setting. So definitely play around with that on your images. Again, I'm just showing you some examples of things you can do in Siril. So go ahead and apply that and then close it. And then the next thing we want to do is there's another script, scripts, Python scripts, VeraLux, and this one is called Revela. So let's click on that one, run it. And then here's what it can do. So it has a way of basically working with the image, and it's going to optimize some of the micro contrast in the image. So it's a very selective contrast enhancement. I'm going to move this slider, let's move it about a quarter of the way across to here. And you'll see that the image will very, very subtly change based on that movement. And then I'm going to move this slider as well, also to about 25% across the slider. Now, if I hold down the space bar, you see very, very subtle change from the original to the very, very subtly stretched. Again, if you work on your image, play around with these sliders. You may get other results that you prefer. I'm going to click on process. And then once it's done, we now have the image looking in much better shape, at least to my eyes. If we want to do like 100% view of the image, there's a button down here at the bottom right. I'm going to click on it. And you see now we've got kind of the 100% view of the image. The next thing I want to do is I want to do a bit of processing in Photoshop. So I'm going to save this image as a TIFF file. So select TIFF files here. Click on save. And I'm going to select 16-bit. And this is important. So for Photoshop, Photoshop will process 16-bit TIFF files, not 32-bit. They will just look really weird in Photoshop. So select that, click on save, save anyway. And oh, and by the way, there's one thing that I failed to mention here. I've been in auto stretch mode the whole time, but now because I've stretched the image, if I go to what's called linear mode, you're now seeing the image of the file as it looks in final processed mode. So apologies, I forgot to do that. So the next thing, let's go into Photoshop and let's open up the image. So here is the TIFF file. This was the FITS file that I was working with previously in Siril. So let's open up by double clicking on this TIFF file. And I'm going to go ahead, I'm just going to do Control J to copy the layer in Photoshop. Some people just use adjustment layers in Photoshop, but just for simplicity's sake, and my preference in this particular example, I'm just going to copy the layer. And what I mean by that is if I make any changes to the image, I can always just delete this layer and start over. The first thing I like to do is to go into Filter and Adobe Camera Raw. And when I do that, I can play around with a couple of settings. One is the saturation. So let's just boost that all the way. And you can see here, I'm going to click once to zoom in and you can see, look at that. Saturation is really kind of way off, way too high. So let's just back off. Let's be conservative. Let's just keep it around 20. I'm going to then increase the vibrance, which kind of selectively brings out some of the saturation without color casts, if you will. So let's just take that to about 10 for the vibrance. The other tool I've got that I use in Photoshop is called Clarity. And it's trying to kind of changes the contrast edges in the image. Now, on this one, let's go all the way and you see what it does here. It's kind of overkill, basically. So let's just back that one off. Let's make it also around 10. And we'll click on OK. And by the way, in Adobe Camera Raw in Photoshop, there's many things you can do and play around with. I'm just going to keep it pretty simple for this processing. And if I hide this layer, you can see the difference that processing made in Adobe Camera Raw. That's it for this particular video. Pretty short, just a very high-level view of some things you can do in Siril to process your images, and then following on with Photoshop to process a little bit more. And you're not locked in necessarily to have to use Photoshop. You may have GIMP, you may have Affinity, other tools that can do all these things similarly that I just did in Photoshop. So that's it. Thank you very much for your time.